Hello everyone and welcome to the podcast. I'm the Grumpy Surfer and your host, Ads Lyson. Happy New Year to you all, and I hope you've made some goals and set the bar high for what you're going to bring this year, whether it's getting in the water surfing, jiu-jitsu, or those of you that are serving in the military, traveling around the world. It was an interesting 2022 for me. I left the military in May. I set up my own business, a jiu-jitsu academy and a therapy clinic. And now rolling into the new year, I'm going to start pumping out some exciting podcasts for you guys to listen to. So my guest this week is a commentator on some high-level grappling productions. He owns his own academy himself called Escapology. And it's just an all-round really nice guy that isn't scared to share his ideas and thoughts on the jiu-jitsu world. So please enjoy my conversation with Tom Barlow. Tom Barlow, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
3 questions for you. How are you? Where are you? And are you training today?
How am I? I'm not too bad. I'm just on the tail end of a migraine, which is always an interesting experience. Where am I? I'm in my living room in Cambridge. We have a beautiful house just on a river. And what was the last question? What am I training to get?
Are you training today?
Not physically, but I'll be doing a ton of mental training.
Migraines.
Yeah.
They're a consistent thing?
No, it's just something that they normally crop up when I get like overtired or overstressed. Like we've had a very busy kind of, I would say, few months. Basically since coming back from Polaris, we've just been on the go. Like Chelsea's been over competing and we've been at a lot of seminars. So for example, like in November, it was like we did Polaris. I taught a seminar the day after. Following weekend, Chelsea she flew over to Rome to go and compete in the Nogi Europeans. So I was like left solo dadding. Following weekend, we flew up to Scotland. So we're up there for 4 days. Got back, and then we pretty much straight went into having Tommy Langaker at our gym, rushing around doing that. And then it's just like ongoing. So I've got a little bit overtired, and that tends to kind of trigger them. Which isn't really ideal when you're trying to ferry a bunch of people around and keep them entertained and be energetic. And all you want to do is curl up into a little dark room and sleep. But, that's part of the life, I suppose.
This is the therapist in me coming out now. So is there anything you specifically do for them?
No, I've tried lots of different. I found that. So one of my tips is mochas, like coffee chocolate. Seems to make a really big difference for me. Like I find that it kind of takes the edge off the migraine a little bit and allows me to function. I think it's because the caffeine's a bit of a vasodilator, so it helps like the blood flow going through your brain. And then you've got the sugars that are just giving you that little bit of pep of energy. But yeah, that's my recommendation. Anybody who has a migraine, try that. See if it works for you. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, but at least you got a nice tasty drink out of it.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's the one thing that I find works pretty well. I've tried lots of different drugs and things like that, and yeah, unfortunately, I would love just to curl up in a ball and sleep, but that's just not an option with a gym and a 3-year-old. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I see a few people every now and again that have headaches and migraines, and I always find that it's a tension build up in sort of like the upper back, shoulders, and neck.
Yeah.
Without going to sort of like anatomy and physiology into all of it. The neck muscles that feed into the back of the skull, they contract when they're under tension, which then puts a lot of pressure onto the brain as well.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people sometimes when they talk about headaches and migraines, they just kind of think it's just something that innately happens and there's not really a lot they can do with it, and they just deal with it. And I think, like you just saying there, take a few meds is kind of like sometimes it's kind of an easy option when there are other things out there that can actually quite blow your mind, and the very simple little things that can actually help, like your mocha, for instance. That works for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think I often find there's obviously migraine relief and stuff like that. I really don't find they do much. I don't like they don't seem to have too much of an impact. So like, sorry, that was my thing going off. So I just really focus on having mockers, and if it gets really bad, then I found paracetamol tends to work better than anything else. It's just kind of like dulling the pain down, and then just ride it out, and eventually it'll go in like 3 or 4 days, which is great.
Well, I think that's quite an interesting start to a podcast talking about migraines.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a little bit about you, then I'll just file a few things that I've Google searched, because we always do that, a little bit of research,
course,
a little bit of Google searching. So you're a 3 times no-gi world champion, European champion, and competed in numerous sub-only competitions, like Polaris, which you commentate on. You're a commentator for Polaris, and have you done any other commentary for any other jiu-jitsu or?
Yeah, I've done a couple of things. For a while I was working for the AJP just before the pandemic. I was doing all of the Grand Slams. I was commentating on there. They were trying to push their kind of accessibility a little bit more, so they employed me to do the commentary work for the Grand Slams, which is quite interesting. So I'd be sat in a box in London for 2 to 3 days at a time, just with the stream coming in and then me commentating over the top of it, which was great. Actually really helped my commentary for Polaris, but it was an interesting experience.
Yeah, because it's not exactly a short contest, is it? You know, if you're talking about each individual, fight that goes on, and you've got no one really to kind of bounce off, and you just kind of sat there, you're talking over it. I can imagine it's trying to do an audio book, but all in one go at the same time.
Yeah, so I'd be doing about 8 hours of talking essentially. And I know it was really bad. Like the other challenging thing as well is because it was, so the feed was coming to me and then being streamed out, so it was live. It wasn't pre-recorded. So the first one I did was in Tokyo, and I think I had to be at the studio for 2 a.m. It was either that one might have been a little bit early. It might have been 10 p.m. and then I finished at like 8 a.m. or something ridiculous like that. So I'd have to be in like through the night doing this commentary work, and it is like, it's hard to go through all of the matches. Like I'd probably do like 100 matches in a sitting type thing. Wouldn't necessarily know about any of the like competitors, because often it'd be like the first day it'd be like blue belts and random people who couldn't find any information about other than what was on their like AJP record, and you'd have to still kind of give some insight, try and create some tension, try and create some excitement about what's going up, pre-frame what's happening later or happening tomorrow, so that you actually had people retuning into the stream. And yeah, it was rough. It was really, really rough. And it was like, it's almost relentless as well, because they're just firing the stream at you. There's like no breaks. Like you just match after match after match after match. So I'd do like close to 100 matches in a day. On Polaris, we do maybe 16, unless it's a one of the team events. Then it will be a lot more. But yeah, it's a big difference. I think the best way I can describe it is, you ever seen the movie Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey?
Yes, of course I have.
One of the all-time great movies,
classic.
Right? Absolute classic. Well, you know where they go into the phone box at the end and they come back and learn to play guitar? That's essentially what I did. Like I was in so Polaris, like I said, we'll do 16 matches. I've done 20 events, I think, for Polaris. And you look at that, like 16, 20, about 250-ish things. I would do that on the space of a weekend. And I did it for like, I did it 5 or 6 times in a row. So I got this huge amount of like commentary experience very, very quickly in a really intense form, and not having anybody else to play off. So it was a really cool experience. So when I came back to do Polaris afterwards, my commentary was way better, because I then understood how to do all of the different parts of it as well, rather than just being like a technical analyst.
Do you take your work home after that? So you go home and you don't stop talking, and Chelsea's like, mate, just shut up.
No, it was the complete opposite. I was wrecked after these things, because they were like middle of the night or whatever. It was a savage experience. Like, and plus the first one I did was about 2 weeks after my daughter was born. So I was like, I was, relatively sleepless nights anyway. And then, trying to look after Chelsea, who's postpartum, and then going into doing this thing in the evening and coming back and having to, be a dad, try and recover for the next day. So like that was brutal. That was a brutal shift, that one. But I just want to curl up in a ball afterwards and go to sleep.
Well, talking about your commentary now, so I'll just carry on like what I was just saying there. So really,
Sorry.
no, that's absolutely fine. So, and well, my last little bit really was that you're a gym owner of Escapology,
Yep.
up in Cambridge, like you say, when you run that with your missus with
Yep.
Chelsea. Um, I'd like to go back to the commentary sort of thing because
Hmm.
it's quite interesting for me, really, because jiu-jitsu as a visual platform has exploded
Yeah.
over the last 10 years, really, because it's very much kind of like if you think about judo in the Olympics, it's there.
Yeah.
But in my personal opinion, that the ground game of judo got taken out purely because it wasn't a great spectacle for people that didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah.
But now, jiu-jitsu is one of the biggest growing sports in the world, and more people understand it because they're watching MMA. The ground game, the commentators there are talking and explaining about what's going on, like your Joe Rogans and so on and so
Mm.
forth. Like Daniel goes on to Cage Warriors and commentates
Yeah.
on there as well. So the awareness of what's going on the floor actually becomes more apparent. So, how did you get approached to start doing the commentary for it? Because, you were just basically working in gyms and competing yourself, weren't you?
Yeah. So the first Polaris event that I commentated on was Polaris 3. So it was very, very early. So I fought on Polaris. I was actually scheduled to, they asked me to fight on Polaris 1, but I couldn't because I was in the US. So I fought on Polaris 2. And
Yep,
then
saw
they
that one.
approached me about, yeah, they approached me after that about coming on to do commentary because they didn't want me to go on the show again, essentially. And I like when was that? That would have been 2016, I think, was when it was doing. So they just literally just came up to me. Like, it's run by, in case you don't know, Scramble's no, sorry, Polaris is run by Scramble and Tatami together. So they put a lot of the energy. I'm sponsored by Scramble anyway, and I've known Ben and Matt and those guys. So they pulled me in because they weren't happy with the commentary that was going on in the first couple of events, and they thought I'd be a good person to do it. Like, I'd put up a few like match breakdowns on YouTube and things like that for people, and they enjoyed it, and they thought I'd do a pretty good job at it. They'd been to, like, Matt had been to seminars of mine that I taught, and I can kind of go off on tangents and talk about stuff, and I'm quite technical in what I can do, and hopefully kind of make it somewhat entertaining as well. So yeah, I really fell into it, and the first time I did it, it was quite a shock. Like, commentary is it can be quite difficult because there's lots of technical things that go into it. So you don't want to talk over the other people. You don't necessarily know when to talk. You don't know, like, the first time you do it, whatever, you don't have like necessarily a good rapport with the people you're commentating with. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to say something stupid. So there's lots of parts that go into it. And Josh Palmer, who was like the lead commentator, like, shout out to Josh. Josh is amazing. He to me, he's probably the best commentator in grappling, I think, by far. He's super professional. He's also really knowledgeable about jiu-jitsu. So having him there, it was quite easy to learn how to commentate because I could kind of see what he was doing and ask him questions and come back and forth from there. So it was a really good experience. It was a nice learning experience to have in there as well.
I can imagine sometimes when you watched commentary, especially in sort of like longer platforms,
Yeah.
like Flow Grappling and a few other ones as well, is that the dead air time can be kind of it can be kind of a bit strange experience. But I guess there's only so many words that you can talk about something, and if nothing's going on that's particularly exciting, whether someone's in sort of like a pin situation and no one's really doing anything at the time, there's only so much you can say at once really about it.
Yeah, it becomes really challenging. We actually, on Polaris, we had a situation with I think it was maybe the second or third show I did. It was Jazari Matuda versus Laurent Foyer, and the match was essentially Jazari knee sliding, top spinning around, and then Laurent recovering, and it was like, I think, 15 minutes of that, and it got to the point that, like, we couldn't say any more about it. It was like, so it was a very weird experience to have to try to commentate over, because it was like, oh, she's knee slid again, and Lauren's recovered, and we're back into it. It was a very odd experience to do. So then you have to pull in other things outside of it. So like, you know, I know Jazari, she's fought Chelsea a few times, so I know the background of, you know, where she's at. Same with Lauren as well. You can, you know, preview what's going to come up if you know it's the same kind of, like, not necessarily stalling, but not a huge amount is happening. No one's really progressing. It's like, you know, remember later in the show we've got, you know, X or Y who's going to compete next. There should be a barn burner of a fight, you know, and you can fill those little bit of gaps, providing you have done the research on the competitors as well, or you have some prior knowledge of what they're what you know, what they've been around. You know, it's that then you can start to fill the dead air time, which is where a lot of commentators go wrong, and something that Josh is very, very good at. So I know myself, Dan, Chelsea, we always like research all the competitors as much as we can beforehand. So we'll have like lists of notes, and then we have like little facts that we can pull out and start talking about. So it's like, you know, for Jazari, for example, it might be like, you know, actually, one of our commentators, Chelsea, has competed against her on numerous occasions. How do you feel that, you know, you can bring in that side of things as well, because you have that additional information, and you can kind of develop the characters of the competitors. You know what I mean? So the teams is a good example, because we often have, or they did the middleweight Grand Prix recently, because you'll end up with guys that have faced each other before. And so you can be like, well, you know, in you know, ADCC trials, you know, Keith, he matched up against this guy. It was a very, very close fight. You know, let's see if they go up again and how Keith, you know, whatever his tactics will have changed. So that makes it a little bit easier in that situation as well.
I feel like sometimes the actual production that you're working on kind of has an obligation to maybe give you those notes as well, because, you know, they're asking you to do something. You know, it's like a newscaster where they've got the teleprompter in front of them, and like someone's feeding them the kind of the words to say, or the background notes, so they actually know what they're talking about. But it's in a way, it's kind of a little bit like this, isn't it? Like, I wouldn't want to go into talking to somebody blind that I've never met before or never spoken to, and then kind of just wing it and make stuff up. So yeah, I guess, but that must be like a really long-winded sort of thing for you, because
I think I'm in terms of researching and the commentary stuff, I'm in the sport. Like I'm continually, you know, looking at matches, I'm watching matches, I know who the competitors are, so it's actually a lot easier. And I have quite a good memory for random stuff, random facts, random matches that I've seen. So it becomes a little bit easier. It's actually easier for me to do it than, say, the production crew, who are, you know, they're in the filming and producing TV events world rather than being in the jiu-jitsu world. So the notes that they would provide wouldn't necessarily be of value to me. It's all about like me being able to research, because also the thing that we'll do as well, I certainly do as well, is I'll go and watch matches that they've competed in, so that I know what their style is, what the things that they like to do, and get some of that background on them as well. And that helps dramatically, because you can kind of start to see how things are going to play out. You'll often hear us talking about like, how do you think this match is going to play out? It's like, well, we know that, let's choose someone. Dan has got a very good guillotine, you know, really strong butterfly guard. However, wrestling's not that strong, blah blah blah, and you can play off on that side of things as well.
Do you get to a point with it, because, you know, you say you're integrated in it and you're doing it day in, day out, you know, you coach jiu-jitsu, you go and do seminars, you know, around the country or around where you are, you commentate, you're watching it. Do you ever feel like you kind of burn out with it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. If we've got like a really hectic schedule, there's times that I just kind of like step back a little bit and just need some space, just to not necessarily be in the jiu-jitsu world so much. You know, that's what happened after my last match against Hobson. Like, I just needed a breakaway. I spent like 3 months training for that match. It was very intense, and I needed to kind of like pull back from training intently, from being in the space where I was always trying to, you know, push my you know, cardio technique, whatever it was, and to take a step back and then relax more and go back to the enjoyment of jiu-jitsu. So yeah, I regularly take kind of breaks from different areas. You know, we'll have seminar breaks where I don't want to be in, you know, when you're teaching seminars, it's effectively performing. You know, you're on stage in front of somebody, you're trying to give them a really positive experience. So we'll pull back from doing seminars, or I'll get like more classes covered, so I won't have to teach as much, or I won't compete, I won't go to competition, just different things like that.
What does Tom Barlow, the jiu-jitsu guru, do outside of jiu-jitsu when you've got that downtime? You know, have you got any outside passions that you like to go to?
I try to nap as hard as I can. No,
I thought you were going to say I like to knit then.
no, that's Chelsea. Chelsea does all of the crafting. She does like knitting, baking, everything. Honestly, no, like I get a lot of enjoyment through doing jiu-jitsu and being in the sport. So even when I'm outside, mostly I try to go back to kind of, I'm using the time as recovery as much as possible to like recuperate my sleep, my health, those side of things. So even when I'm outside of jiu-jitsu, it's rare that I'm on like a full 100% break from it. Like I probably in 20 years I've never done that. It's more that I'm just mentally switching from a different element, like not having to be as performative or as focused on training, and that allows me to decompress because I enjoy jiu-jitsu at the end of the day. It's my hobby as well as my job. And I shift things around in that way. Like in you know, other stuff that I do. I used to spend, you're down in Devon, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so I spent 18 years down in Plymouth. So I used to go out surfing quite a lot. We now live on a river, so we go out paddleboarding. Just hanging out with people, chilling, relaxing, stuff like that.
I think some people really can't grasp the idea of like a work-life balance, really. I mean, I've just completed a 22-year career in the military, so and I mean, I've just opened my own little jiu-jitsu school as well, and now I'm a therapist, so I do something called the Bowen technique and sports massage as well. And I primarily started those things because, one, I was in a job where I was working for myself. I was working in the gym, so I was a PTI by trade, so writing programs, running gyms, and all that sort of thing. And I didn't really have a boss. So I was doing everything myself. I could be as proactive as I wanted to be, or I could be as lazy as I wanted to be. Now, the latter end, the lazy side of it, some people might argue I am, but I like to be productive with my time, and my time management goes well. So when I left, I couldn't really see myself going into kind of doing that 9 to 5 office job, because one, mentally my capacity for that would probably diminish, and I'd start to fade a little bit. And I also wanted to do things and try and make a living out of something that I enjoyed doing. So that work-life balance with the family, with doing the things that you like doing and getting paid for it, I think works out really well. And like you're saying, your time is obviously quite precious. You've now developed and got to the point in your career now where you've got lots going on as well. But do you find that you have to really focus on to work on that work-life balance as well?
Yeah, that's something that I'm always going off in different directions, like a little bit too far. So I'm always, actually, Chelsea's very good at like pulling me back down into like, okay, we need to take a break here. One of the best things that we did recently was we now have like a 4-day work, because we would always either be competing or teaching seminars on weekends. So we wouldn't get a lot of downtime. So now we actually only teach at our gym for 4 days in a week. We teach Monday through Thursday. And then the weekends are normally like sometimes we don't do anything. Like last weekend, we just didn't do anything. We just chilled out and relaxed. And then, this weekend, Chelsea's up at the comp on Sunday. So by shifting to a 4-day week, it made a huge difference to our kind of like ability or to our work-life balance. Essentially, it went from working all the time to dropping it back down. And that's, it's absolutely massive. And with Thea, it's getting daughter as well, is getting a little bit easier now because she started to go to nursery. So whereas before we're having to do all of our work, so to speak, the stuff that we're doing during the day, so like admin, like running our online thing and whatever else, it would have to be around her, so she'd be in the environment as well. And that's always like you have like one eye on her and whether she's going to kill herself or whether she's painting on walls or whatever she's trying to do. Now she's at nursery, so we have like these blocks of time which are more available to us that we can either choose to recover more, which is often what we actually do, or like focus on specific tasks that we have going on as well.
Yeah, having kids thrown into the equation is, especially when they're young, is quite mentally draining to a point.
Yeah, we've had that. She's going through a phase at the moment. I think one of the hard things about kids is they're never like they're always changing. Like they'll do something great for a little bit, and then they'll suddenly change to the other, to being like a hellion. So at the moment, she's waking up at about 5:30ish in the morning, which, you know, it's not too bad, except we often don't get home until 9:30. By the time we've decompressed, it's quite late in the evening, and then you're getting woken up. So we're getting like, you know, 5 hours sleep a night, just consistently, which isn't ideal for recovery on any level. And she's been doing that for probably 2 or 3 months, and that has been just grinding us down slowly over time. And her as well, you know, she's getting tired because she's waking up so early. So we've been trying to figure out how to solve this solution. But I always think that kids are like you. Before kids, I was like, man, I don't know how I'm going to fit this child in. It's going to be crazy. And then now, when I look back on my life, I was like, I had so much free time not to worry about it. Like we'd come, you know, we come back from teaching, like, so depending on where we go, we might take her to seminars, we might not. But if we come back, let's take the Polaris weekend as a good example. I left at my mum's, went up to Polaris, worked on Polaris for the day, slept overnight in Southampton, drove up, taught a seminar Sunday morning in Oxford, drove back here. And then when I got back, it wasn't like, now I can relax. It was like, now you're a dad again, and you have to go back to being the job of a dad until like she goes to sleep. And then it's like, okay, now I can finally get that little bit of time to decompress and go from there. It's challenging.
I love it when people put stuff up on social media and they go, oh, look, I've just got, you know, this little bundle of love has just come through the door. Isn't she so beautiful? I'm real blunt with it. All I just put is something like, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
They're like, kids are amazing. They are, it's such an awesome experience being a parent, but they are hard work. You know, I think I was pretty fortunate that when I became a dad, I was quite real with, I knew it was going to be challenging. Like I fully expected to not have lots of sleep, you know, for it to be a grind. I wasn't fully prepared for it, but I feel like I had a good idea of what having a child would be like. And I think a lot of people don't go in with that attitude. They don't go in with like, this is, you know, this is going to be wonderful. You know, our child's going to be perfect and they'll sleep all the time. It's like, no, you got to be prepared for that. Like they're going to be tough. They're going to be really, really challenging. They're going to, you know, test you in ways that you didn't think possible. Like yesterday, I had a migraine, and my child, you can find it on Chelsea's Instagram, is climbing up me saying, climbing Daddy Mountain, climb Daddy Mountain, and standing on my neck. And I'm like, this is dad life 101. And this is why I'm always tired. So yeah, I think that helped me having a very real attitude about what I was getting myself into. You know, I think that because we had fear a little bit later on, or I had fear when it was a little bit later on, you know.
Talking about kids, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about kind of your background. You mentioned there, you know, you spent a lot of time down in Plymouth. So, you know, where did you grow up, and how did you get into the martial arts jiu-jitsu journey?
So I actually grew up very close to where I live now, maybe 5 miles away in Cambridge. And then I was here, and then I went down to Plymouth mostly because I wanted to surf. I got into surfing when I was like 14, 15. I started, you know, going down to Croydon pretty regularly, or whenever we could. And yeah, so I fell into kind of surfing, and I was like, cool, if I've got this opportunity, I may as well not just go somewhere that I want to do a course, or like go to university. I may as well go somewhere that I want to, you know, have the other things as well, like surfing, for example. So that's the reason I went down to Plymouth. Around at the same time, so when I was about 15, 16, I think I first saw like my first Bruce Lee movie, and I was like, yes, want to be Bruce Lee. That is what I'm gonna. That's where I want to be going. I'd done a little bit of judo beforehand, but like that was like the moment that I was like, you know, I'm gonna start martial arts as I'm not gonna say an adult because I was only 15 or 16, but that's where I want to do that. I want to get some experience in it. There wasn't any JKD clubs around where I was, so I started out in Laogar, which is a mix of like kung fu and kickboxing. So there's some forms and stuff, so I could feel a bit like I was, you know, doing that kind of thing. And then Thai boxing as well. So I was doing those two back to back because this was 96, 97. So there wasn't really any jiu-jitsu, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. MMA was virtually non-existent. I think there may have been one show in the UK or two shows in the UK. And it just wasn't around. You couldn't do MMA. It wasn't really on the radar. It was still thought of like as human cockfighting. In fact, I remember when I was working at a petrol station, I remember reading an article about human cockfighting comes to the UK. And it was like, okay, yeah, it's just MMA. So I started training then, and then the other benefit at Plymouth, there was a JKD club as well. So I saw it on the sports and societies. I was like, oh, cool. So I can do that. I can become Bruce Lee. I can surf, and I can get a degree at the end of it, which is cool. So then I went in, and it took me a while to join the club because we were in Halls, which is like 1.5 miles, 2 miles from the university. So I couldn't get to the classes regularly until my second year, and then I just started training in that, and I just stuck at it, and I found my interest was in the MMA side of things, like the grappling side specifically. And yeah, just fell into it that way.
I think during that time, like you say, there weren't that many jiu-jitsu clubs around at that time. And I think the only ones really that were actually quite live were up north, really, sort of like along the M62 corridor, people that were actually opening places that actually did some form of jiu-jitsu, whether it was catch wrestling or sambo or something like that.
You had some of the judo clubs were starting to get into the groundwork side of things in like the very early 2000s. You had Mauricio. The first jiu-jitsu seminar I ever took was it was Rick Young. I think I went to a Rick Young seminar in like 2003. It was either Rick Young or Mauricio Gomez. They were one of the first two people that I did. And like Rick Young was like a brown belt still at the time. So in fact, it might have been even before that. But like, there was nothing. And then Mauricio came over, and Roger came over, and Braulio came over like 2004, 2005 time. I think it was around then. Braulio might have been over when he was a brown belt for like a few months or whatever. But that was in like Birmingham. There was a little bit in London. There's a guy called Roger Brooking in London as well. Roberto Attila, who I think was over in Bournemouth, somewhere like that. But that was it. That was jiu-jitsu in the UK at the time. It was really, there was nothing else. I think one of the biggest influences is Eric Paulson, like looking back on it, because Eric would always come over. Like I did an Eric Paulson seminar in like 2001. If anybody who doesn't know who Eric is, he was the first, or one of the first non-Westerners to win a Shooto title. And Shooto was like MMA. If you look at like early UFC, like UFC 1 that Royce Gracie won, it was like a tough man competition. You had like these different arts coming in, and then Royce who won, but it was all like mostly predominantly strikers. They were all kind of brawlers. Shooto, on the other hand, was like they'd already started introducing like kickboxing and Thai boxing, like the grappling side of things from like the pro wrestling was already involved in it. So like early Shooto, like I'm talking like 94, 95, even back when Eric was competing at like slightly earlier than that, like early 90s, looks more like modern MMA than the UFC did when the UFC came about. So when Eric started coming over, he already had this kind of long history of doing modern MMA, heavily influenced by like Hickson and Hig and Machado and people like that as well. So he used to teach seminars all around the country and really introduced grappling through like his style CSW to the UK. And then a lot of people kind of got into grappling, started looking for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coaches around the area. And I feel there's so many of the old school coaches that I know who started training with Eric. That was like their first real introduction to MMA, was going to an Eric Paulson seminar. Or even more tangentially, going to like a Dan Innocento seminar who Eric was at, and then Eric would kind of come back and do like an MMA seminar as well. So I think Eric is really, he's got a big influence on the UK jiu-jitsu scene, even though it's kind of more in the background. If you talk to like people from my generation, the amount of people who have trained with him is staggering,
If you were down in Plymouth and you were traveling up to these different places to learn different techniques, were you very much kind of got a couple of mats down, you're doing your Jeet Kune Do, find a couple of training partners, and you just kind of practicing, this sort of stuff, almost kind of like garage jiu-jitsu, like back in the day?
No. So when I started in the university club, and then my instructor there, a guy called Anton St. James, who's very big now into like the Filipino martial arts world. Like he's one of the top guys in the country. He quickly, in about 2002, he opened a full-time academy. I mean, he's trained with just scores of people. Like he's a crew under Master Todd. He was training him back in the 70s. Spent a bunch of time training with like various different instructors. Like he was black belt. There was like 15 of black belts kind of thing, and all of like traditional martial arts. So like he's very highly ranked in what was the style of his karate? I can't remember what style of karate he was. Very, very highly ranked in those kind of things, and fell into like the JKD and the screamer side of things more. He opened his academy in 2002, which is the same time as I was finishing up university. So I started teaching there pretty early. like I was teaching part-time from like 2003. No, 2004, when I think I got my black belt under him in 2004. No, 2003, sorry. And then I started teaching for him pretty much full time then. And we were doing like kickboxing predominantly, some of the FMA, some of the JKD side of things, because my passion was in like more so the ground side of things. And coming into MMA, I've spent time training with Eric. Like I went over to the US and trained with Eric a bunch. One of my claims to fame is I was one of Ken Shamrock's sparring partners for when he was fighting chemo. So the same time that I was training with Eric over in LA, he was also, we were going down to like the Lions Den in San Diego and training Ken. So I was getting beaten up by Ken while I was over there, which was very entertaining because Ken's about twice my size.
I was just about to say you must be like half his size and half his weight.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. But Eric would just find people to throw in there. It was a very funny experience training with, doing that whole thing. I would just get beaten up regularly. You know, it was good. It was an interesting experience. Eric's advice to me when I first went into, so when we got the first session that we got to spar with Ken, he was, do you know who Vernon White is? Vernon
Yes.
Tiger White. This is old school MMA. Like he was king of the, I think he was king of Pancrase, and he might have won King of the Cage as well, been one of their title holders. Very good, like legitimately a good MMA guy. So he's sparring with Ken, and the first thing we see is like Ken just knock him out, like throws this punch, knocks out Vernon. And then Vernon's like laying on the ground, semi-conscious, and Ken stands over and he goes, "You okay?" And Vernon's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, get up then." And then he's going again a little bit, and then he knocks him down again. And he's just like, "Oh." And then Eric's like, "Okay, you're in the ring, go." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Just keep moving around. Don't let him hit you. Don't try and trade with him." I was like, "All right, fine." And I did the exact opposite. I stood there for a second, and Ken hit me with this right. I remember this right hand punch just coming towards my head, and it hit me like a freight train, like square in my forehead. And I was like, "Oh." Okay, running around, and like I just it was my introduction to sparring with Ken. It was very entertaining.
It must be quite surreal doing that as well, because Ken's
like,
one of the OGs, right?
Yeah, I was like 23 at the time, something like that. And yeah, just over there sparring with Ken Shamrock, helping him prep for Tito. You know, I sparred with, like, I did through training with Eric. I sparred with so many guys. I sparred with Vernon and a guy called Jay Martinez, who ran. It wasn't the Shark Tank. There was another one no, it was the Shark Tank. That's what he ran, which was up in Orange County. Like, again, producing legitimate fighters. They used to cross train with the Lions then all the time. So I was training with those guys. Who's the guy that won the Ultimate Fighter? James Wilkes. I was sparring with James Wilkes as well and training with him a bunch. Like I was training at the Inasano Academy with all those guys. Yeah, it was a really odd experience. Really, really strange experience. To do that, yeah.
Did you ever manage to get over to some of the actual, you know, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu academies like Henzo's or any of those guys?
No, I never got to do that. I was training mostly with Eric, so Eric would have guys come in. So I did a bunch of classes with Higgins. I went to Higgins once. This is when it was in Hermosa Beach. We rocked up. I think it was Hermosa. Eric was driving me around everywhere, so I'm not 100% sure it was. We went to those guys, but it was mostly with Eric and people that Eric could have around him, like some of the old school black belts that would be teaching out of different academies or teaching out the Inasano Academy as well. But I never went to Hickson's Garage or anything like that, or the original Gracie Academy or Henzo's or any of those kind of things. I was always more on the West Coast than the East Coast.
So fast forwarding a little bit, you managed to get your black belt after training for a year, I believe I read somewhere, with Braulio, who's just come down to do a seminar with you guys.
Yeah, so I started training with Braulio. Like I went after I trained with Eric. I was competing MMA still, so I was like I was training with my friends up in London, Matt and James, both very like kind of, I would say, early pioneers of MMA in the UK. So James Nicol Evans won a couple of like regional, so UK MMAC. He won the title there. Fought on Cage Rage. Cage Rage, because that's no longer around. Fought on Cage Rage a bunch. Did a really good job in that. Matt won, same thing, UK MMAC title. I fought on that show a few. So I was like traveling up to train with them, doing mostly MMA and MMA based grappling, and then training with my guys and helping them grow and putting some competitors down in Plymouth. Around about end of 2005, 2006. Actually, I'm going to skip back a little bit. When I was over in the US the first time, there was a guy called Paul Kelly who runs Martial Arts Concepts up in somewhere near Birmingham. Can't remember the name of the place. Dudley, up in
Dudley.
Dudley. He's up there. And he was over at the same time, so I was hanging out with him, and he said he was training with this guy called Braulio Estima. And Eric was like, "Oh, Braulio's really good. You should go and train with him." Well, Braulio's in Birmingham. I'm in Plymouth, which is a good 4-hour drive apart. So I didn't actually get to start training with Braulio until the end of, I think it was like early 2005, early 2006, or right at the end of 2005, when I met him at a martial arts show, and like Paul introduced me to Braulio, and I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna come up and train." He was like, "Cool, come up and train." So I started coming up and training, having out from seminars. And then in 2011, he promoted me to my black belt. So it was about 5.5, 6 years, something like that. It took me. Yeah.
Braulio is quite a he's a very charismatic guy, isn't he? He's helping out with the rollathon at the moment with the real guys.
Yeah.
He always makes me smile whenever I listen to his commentary. And he's got a list of his accolades that, pages of stuff.
It's like the amount of stuff that he's done is incredible. Like, and he's one of the most. If you ever get a chance to go to one of Braulio's seminars, it's always worth attending. He'll always show some awesome techniques, some really great concepts. He has a fantastic way of teaching, but the dude is so charismatic. It is unreal. You can almost like, if you're at something like Europeans, which might have 4,000 to 6,000 people at, and Braulio walks in, like, he walks in, and it's like it's just weird, like, being around him. And I mean, I've known him since, like, for a really long time. Like, we're really good friends. So like, to me, it's just Braulio, but like for everybody else, it's like, oh my god. But he does have this.
It's like what we were it was like what we were talking about at the beginning of this. Is like, he is that personality. And when you're talking about, he walks into a room and everyone goes, "Oh, it's Braulio." It's like, he's an ADCC Hall of Famer. So he's got this aura of perception that people kind of have got over him already.
I think so with Braulio, it's very different to when someone like Hodger walks into the room. Hodger, to me, Hodger's probably the greatest jiu-jitsu player of all time, bar none. Like, he, the stuff that he did, like his run, I think there was a 2009 Worlds where he cross-choked everybody from Mount, like 9 matches, is insane. Like, no one has ever even come close to doing that. And the same with his run at like ADCC, just submitting everybody again. No one, like, he's just amazing, right? But when he walks into a room, it's a very different experience. He's nowhere near as like large, if that makes sense. Like, his personality, you'll see people kind of go over and talk to him, but he's kind of more reserved and like really kind of chill. When Braulio comes in, it's like everybody's already having a good time. Like, the moment that he walks into the room, it is an amazing experience to see it happen. And really, it's cool. Like, I try to have like 1% of the charisma of Braulio. That's my goal. Like, if I could do that, I would be a happy person.
A fair one. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about competition versus recreation. Guys that train. I mean, kind of what's your perception on it?
I think it depends on, you have different, everybody's got their own goals when they go to train, right? Like, some people are just doing it for fun. Some people want to like unwind and relax. Some people want to be like competitors. I think everybody, regardless of why they do jiu-jitsu, can find benefit in competing, and training like a competitor as well. Like, when you train if there's a few like obvious benefits. When you train for a competition, you have an end goal in mind. Like, that, let's say in 6 weeks' time, you're going to compete. Typically, that means that then your diet's going to get cleaned up, so you're going to eat better. You're going to train a little bit harder. You're going to get a little bit more recovery and sleep. Without any other benefit of the competition, those are 3 really good things to get, because you just look after yourself a little bit more because you have this end goal in mind. In terms of the actual day of competition, you're putting yourself into an environment and in a state where you are experiencing stress. Like, that you're going to go onto a mat and you're going to have to fight another dude who's also trying to rip your head off. So you have like long-term stress build up for like 6 weeks. Like, enter this competition, you get that little adrenaline dump, and then you have like slow cortisol adrenaline going through up until the day of the competition, then you have a massive adrenaline dump again, or you might have a massive adrenaline dump again. And understanding how to deal with that kind of stress is incredibly important for people. Like, the outcome of a competition is way less important to me than the people just going in and doing it, because it helps you grow as either an athlete or as a person. Like, putting yourself in those stressful situations, they make you just generally kind of more chill. You know, like like the things that seem to stress you out before, not so big anymore, right? Like, no one's out there really trying to rip my head off, unless they are trying to rip your head off, which is a different situation. But you can be a lot like it kind of helps, you know, your boss isn't, okay, yeah, he's my boss, whatever, you know, he's not trying to kill me. Not in the same way anyway. So I think the mental side of things really help. And then it just comes down to, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to try and be a competitor, or do you just want to do it as a hobby and then compete on the side? You know, compete every once in a while. Like, we have tons of guys at our gym that will just, like, every now and again drop into a competition, and we have guys that will train. You know, they'll do a competition every weekend, and then guys in between, and then some guys who don't compete but they still come to our comp classes because they want that more intense side of training. So yeah, I think tons of benefits to competing for everybody. I don't really see a downside most of the time.
How do you find that? And I find this quite interesting from, you know, starting what I've just started, is how do you find, I'm going to talk a little bit about grading to an extent. How do you find grading the guys that are up against the, you know, the constant competitors to the guys that are recreationally doing jiu-jitsu? How do you find the comparison of doing that? Because also, to throw into that mix as well, you've got age ranges, you've got, you know, different physical abilities as well. Because, you know, you might have let's talk blue belt, for instance, you know, a guy that's a recreational blue belt, but then you've got another blue belt that competes all the time, and he's an absolute killer. He's like murking the purple belts because he's like in the gym, you know, five days a week, training twice a day. But he's kind of like, he's the different stage of the guy that's just wanting to turn up, you know, once a day, every day of the week, coming for a bit of a social, because it's like a mental thing for him too.
Yeah.
So,
I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, I don't compare those two. Like, they're on very different trajectories. Like, the guy who's a blue belt and, you know, going into competitions regularly and wants that side of things, he's on a different path than the guy who's coming in recreationally. Like, I would look at it, okay, how's that blue belt, the competition blue? This is my right hand. He's the blue belt in the competition. You know, how's he doing in competitions? You know, is he up against, like, is he progressing? Is he winning those competitions? You know, is he giving the guys who are winning, like, a tough match? Like, how old is he, for example? You know, like, what are his goals? Like, if it's a blue belt who's like 20 or like 19, super young, probably going to stay at blue belt longer than somebody, like, even who are an active competitor, than somebody who's like 25, 30, or 25, mid-20s, because I want to get them experience in the black belt categories as an adult. So they might get pushed on a little bit faster. The other guys might get pushed on a little bit slower. And then that recreational guy, it's the same thing. Like, how does he do against someone who's also like in their 40s, also training twice a week, you know, also has kids? You know, is he developing his technique? Is he making like the common mistakes that we want to avoid? You know, is he progressing? You know, does he have a good attitude in training? So we never compare people in that way. It's like, where are you going, and where do you want to be? And how can we help you get there the fastest? What's going to be the best route for you to progress through the ranks? So it's very, very individual.
I was like asking that question because, you know, there's always little bits in between different types of coaches that have a different kind of form of answer to it, as well. I mean, how do you find? I mean, you've been coaching for a long time, so how do you find coaching helps your jiu-jitsu? Do you think it does, or is it kind of like, does it hinder it a little bit because it's taking away like your training time?
The vast majority of my jiu-jitsu, I've always been my own coach. Like, I've never, except for the times that I spent over training at AOJ, where I had like Gui or Rafa coaching me for like 6 weeks at a time or whatever, I was always my own coach. So from even before I started really doing jiu-jitsu, I was already teaching MMA and like the ground side of MMA, working with Eric, doing like CSW, like I'm a coach under Eric as well. So I was teaching the CSW things. It forced me to break down like techniques, because if you can't understand the technique, then I definitely can't show it. I can't relay it to someone very easily. The better I understand it, the more easily I can relay it to somebody usually. So even though I wasn't actively drilling all the time or able to drill, mentally I was engaged. Every single class I'm engaged in trying to, deliver this information the best way I can, make it understandable to people, being able to break it down easier. And then I used to do this all the time. I do it less so now because I'm a lot more experienced, but whenever I was teaching, I would also be researching the techniques that I was teaching. Because I don't believe that I know everything in jiu-jitsu. I don't believe that I am the best communicator. There are tons of people out there that are far more skilled than me, better communicators, and I can learn from them. And I can then take that information and impart it to my students. Some people give really nice, like visual metaphors for things. Some people give very good descriptions of things. If I can learn all of that, try to impart it to my students, that helps me and that helps them grow, and it helps me grow as quickly as possible. So that's what I used to do. I do that more so now because I am a lot more experienced and I've been coaching a lot more and I have that kind of body of knowledge. But yeah, so that was the majority of my training, my drilling was like teaching and then applying that in sparring as well. Like that's what I would do. I would teach techniques and I would go, when I came to spar, I would then try and use these techniques on my students. And I figured if I could still use them on my students, even though they knew what I was trying to do, then I probably got it pretty good.
Yeah, I always found that quite a good analogy to use, really, because again, I'm very similar. So I've learned a lot more through coaching. I mean, I've coached since I know you shouldn't. I've coached since I was like a blue belt, because when I was working in the gyms, every gym I went to, I made a little dojo in there, bought some mats, put it down, and trained, and had guys that weren't necessarily interested in jiu-jitsu come down and we start training. So, I mean, I'm not talking like I'm teaching berimbolo or something like that, something quite complex. I'm talking like, real foundation, fundamental sort of stuff like side control, how to the movement patterns of it all. And I found that by teaching that, I'm subconsciously reinforcing those movements to myself as well, which kind of it kind of, I think for me it makes me better.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it really does. Like your training isn't just like a physical thing that you do. Like there's a huge mental component. There's all like the studies that they've done, like the free throw study, that one, where they took guys and they had guys. There's three groups: group that practiced like physical throwing up free throws, and then they had the group that thought about it, and then they had the group that did nothing. And the guys that practiced did improved. The guys that just thought about throwing free throws improved only slightly less than the guys that actually practiced, and the guys that didn't do anything didn't improve at all. So the mental side of things is just as important as like the physical side of things. So when you're breaking down techniques, when you're researching techniques, when you're engaged in it as well, that helps you grow and develop. For you, when you're teaching, you're often, it can be easier to engage with the subject that you're doing than if you're sat watching someone teach you, because you've got like, oh, what am I having for tea? I wonder how the wife's doing. Are the kids okay? You've got all these other thoughts. When you're teaching, you're physically like wrist. Like, we've got to explain this well. We've got to do all these different things with our body, blah, 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 and you go from there. And to your point about teaching as a blue belt, like I started teaching as a blue belt because there was no other option. There weren't any, like there was no one teaching jiu-jitsu in the Southwest. Like my Darren Yeoman, who was over in Torquay, that was it. Me, Darren Yeoman, a couple of guys in Exeter, was the jiu-jitsu scene down in the Southwest for a really long time. But even now, like if I teach a white belt, often I give too much information and too much detail to them that they don't benefit from it. They know, like we often view teaching jiu-jitsu like carving a statue. You start with this like lump of clay, and your first goal is to get like a rough outline of what it looks like with zero detail. And as a black belt, like a blue belt can do almost just as good job, and often a better job, of teaching beginners, because they're more enthusiastic. Like they're not getting frustrated with like, why don't you know your left and your right hand? Like this is like stuff like that. So having like lower grades who are enthusiastic, have the right attitude, teach beginners is also really good. And then it also creates like a natural progression of once those beginners have trained with them for a little bit and they come into your regular classes, they're able to take on that greater level of information, greater knowledge, and they see the difference between the two of like, oh, this is a purple belt, this is now a black belt who's been training 20 plus years. It makes a really nice contrast for people as well. So people get, certainly with beginners, they get too hung up on like, you got to have like tons of experience to teach a beginners. Often it's down to the attitude, and as long as you know the movements well enough and you can impart that, start carving that statue, make them coachable, and eventually over time they're going to learn anyway.
I've made that mistake before where I'm teaching something really quite basic to people that are kind of new to the sport, and then you get a little bit too over enthusiastic and you start putting other bits of details in it, and you just see them kind of stood there or sat there going, and then I'm like, that, you really don't know what I'm talking about, do you?
No.
And they're like, that, nah, that's all.
Yeah. Like, well, if you imagine when someone comes in, like jiu-jitsu in itself is completely weird. Like it is so against the natural instincts that you have for people, like playing guard, for example, right? Was one of the biggest problems that people have is like they try and kick people away, like push them away. That's totally wrong for playing guard. Like it's that, and you have to train that instinct out of people. Or like turning your back to stand up because it seems like the most efficient way to stand up off the ground. Again, completely alien to people. So if you're trying to teach beginners too much, too in depth, it's like it doesn't help them. You need it very simple. And we found the best thing that we ever did was we created this positional hierarchy, and it's not like it's not you get 4 points for a mount or 4 points for the back. It's like it's a framework to understand jiu-jitsu. Like, where am I at on this ladder or this path or this roadmap, and where do I need to go to next? So you can either go forwards or you can go backwards, and irrespective of whether you're top or bottom. So to give you an example, let's say let's take guard retention as an example, right? I'm an open guard. I want my feet on my partner, okay? Or from a passing perspective, they've got their feet on me. The first thing I need to do, get rid of those feet. From there, I'll probably end up on the shins. Once I'm on the shins, I've got to clear the shins and get onto their frames. Once I'm on their frames, I've got to get inside their frames and chest to chest. So that's like 4 steps: feet, shins, frames, chest. For the person on the bottom, it's exact opposite. Okay, I'm on the shins, I got to get them on my feet. I'm on the frames, got to get shins, got to get feet. And it just takes jiu-jitsu, which is this kind of like insanely complicated thing with all these different guards, all these different positions, and I think it's like 8 different things that we got it down to, and it just gives them a complete framework, so they know, oh, this is exactly what I've got to do. Like, I know where I'm at now. Where do I go to next? That's the next point on the path. And by teaching people that framework first and early, it made everything else so much easier.
How do you feel about the development of jiu-jitsu? Because I feel like the whole emphasis and the sport is very much, I call it like a big wheel. You've got the early days where guys are doing fundamental jiu-jitsu, like the Hodges sort of stuff, where you're just talking about learning a couple of things, being really, really good, almost sort of like a perfectionist with them, to the point now where people are learning insane amounts of leg entries, leg locks, to rolling barambolas. You've got worm guard, K guard, all these different types of guard. There's, like you say, that there's almost kind of like an infinite amount of techniques, and with those techniques within techniques. This is going to sound really weird. So where do you kind of see the evolution of it going? Is it just going to come all the way back round, like leg locks and legs are all going to kind of disappear to a certain extent?
You're seeing that now. Like, jiu-jitsu tends to follow cycles quite regularly. So we went through this whole, very recently, we've been through this cycle of like everybody's using leg locks. It's a good example, right? There was like, 2015, really good solid advancements in leg locks. But we'll get back to that in a second. But if you look at the leg locks they're using, these are things that I learned from Eric 2000. Like, they've been in Sambo for a really long time. The difference is now is the level of control that people have in them has increased. Like they're better at controlling, they're better at entering, and then the braking mechanics tend to be better. So they've taken this old school set and just refined it a little bit, and then it was killing everybody for a while. Now what's happened is everybody's got very, very good at defending leg locks. Like the things that were working and that people hadn't necessarily been exposed to no longer work in the same way. So we're now coming into a situation where leg locks are being kind of more pushed to the side because everybody's getting better at passing and just able to shut them down. So if you're just a leg lock specialist, you're going to struggle because the guys are going to be good enough most of the time to shut your leg attacks down. And so you then need to work on your passing again in your top game, and the wrestling side of things. So we're now back into more of like a passing side of things. In between that, we had like this back attack stage of things. So if you look at leg locks, it went attacking the legs, then it was back attacks, and now it's passing because they're all kind of interchangeable and interlinked. And that's how the cycle keeps going. It's like something in guard, something that kind of develops on top. Someone then develops something else that counters the thing on top, that develops into like better on top, and it just keeps bouncing forwards and forwards and forwards. Within that, you are always going to have people that specialize in certain areas. You know, that might have, like K guard might be a really good K guard, for example. It might be, they have just really solid leg drags or birimbolas or inversions. Doesn't really matter too much. But at the high level, principally, jiu-jitsu goes from being this huge subject to tiny and small again, because you understand the principles of jiu-jitsu and how no matter where you're at, you know how to shut it down. You know how to kill the person's posture. You know how to take away their structure, their muscle structure, kill their hips, and it kind of becomes simpler again. So if you watch, I remember when Rafa, it was fighting Cabrinha, and they ended up in 50-50. He inverted out of 50-50 and ended up on Cabrinha's back. And it was like this cool sequence, like very, very awesome. I think it was like the 6th time that Rafa won Worlds. I was up at Braulio's at the time. I was hanging out with Braulio, staying in his house. And on the floor, he was like, "Do you know how he did this?" I was like, "Yeah, he kind of did this thing." And within like 5 minutes, probably even less than that, Braulio had figured out what the counter was, and like could already do it. And it's because you know the principles behind what it is. Like, and now you see that inversion that Rafa's doing all the time from people. Kind of, it's transitioned into crab rides and like top bolos and things like that, and it's just become commonplace. But just because something's new doesn't mean that you don't know how to instinctively defend against it.
Well, new things are always kind of a kind of a developmental or evolution of another position. I always find. So like, you got your K guards and your worm guards, but all they are really, they're just kind of like an evolution of an open guard by wrapping a gi lapel, and people have been doing that for years, but they've just called it something.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Brazilian dental floss, which is it's essentially what's it called? I can't remember what Bikinin calls it. It'll come back to me in a minute. But essentially, it's like a worm guard without the foot in. One of the most old school sweeps from half guard that there is. Like you feed the lapel through the legs, you come up to your knees, drive over the top, boom. Like it's one of the most common sweeps that you'll see, particularly in masters divisions or from people of my age group. Happens all the time. So there's nothing. It just Keenan got this other dynamic of using like worm guard and breaking the knee lines and doing a few other different things like that as well. But yeah, it's principally the way that you kill it is relatively similar between the two. And the same with K guard. Again, K guard's nothing. K guard's not even new. Like that is super old school. Like really, really old school. That people were like coming underneath the leg like that and trying to hug onto it and then transitioning into the to either some of the upper body attacks or lower body attacks from there. Very, very old school. So yeah, you just keep seeing these things coming in cycles.
I'd like to talk to a little bit, just for sort of a 5 minutes, a little bit about how I kind of really reached out to you. I wanted to talk to you for ages, if I'm perfectly honest, but I'm just really rubbish with writing stuff down, if I'm perfectly honest. I saw a post which was kind of pertinent to what I'm doing at the moment with like the business models for academies and stuff like that. And I think this is like an unspoken kind of thing within the jiu-jitsu world is that people think that jiu-jitsu and business is kind of like a dirty word. You know, you shouldn't be in it for making the money, you know, making money out of people. That you should be doing it for the love and the passion and all this sort of thing. But you know, I'm very 50-50 with all of it. If I can make a living out of teaching jiu-jitsu, I would love that. But I'm passionate about jiu-jitsu as well. You know, I love training. And if I can train the people that are my clients, technically, you know, they come through the door, they pay for a service. If I can train them to a point where they become socially my friends and also really good through the techniques that I've taught and they improve my jiu-jitsu as well, well, surely that's a positive thing, and we should be celebrating that and also trying to get more people to do it too.
Yeah. Like, to me, the whole attitude about not making money from martial arts is ridiculous. Like, it is one of the most ridiculous things that you've ever had. Like, I see it. I even saw it today. There's a guy who's, you know, he's launching this program to try and help martial arts instructors, and like he put up a Facebook ad, just getting so much hate underneath. Like, you're in my dojo, you should do this for the passion. It's like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. My goal as an instructor is to impact the largest number of people I can, right? Like within my community, in the world at large now as well. The only way I'm going to be able to do that is through being successful, by having good communication skills and being able to effectively sell my brand. Like, I think the problem where people encounter this is where it becomes too focused on profit and on money, and it loses the person. You know, you forget about the person. So every person who walks through the door just becomes another number. Like, okay, this is what I'm gonna get this off them when they join. This is gonna be their first month. This is what they're gonna get. We're gonna upsell them to this program at this point. You know, they're gonna need to buy this bit of kit. Man, that's terrible. Like, to me, that is essentially what the McDojo thing is. But you can charge a fair price for your product and still teach good martial arts, still make a good living from it, and not do any of those things. So like when people come into our gym, like, our gym is really successful. Like, we got somewhere around 250 members at the moment. The only reason that we don't have more is because we physically can't fit them in the space. Like, we have between 5 to 10 people on a waiting list for a class every single night. And these are students that just can't fit into the classes. And like, we have a very, very strong product. We charge a fair price for what we do. If you look at any other sport out there, we charge a very, very fair price for doing it. Like, my daughter's swimming lessons are £13 a class for half an hour. Okay, that's swimming. Okay, her gymnastics classes were the same. Like, and yet in martial arts, it tends to be like, we got charged £2-3 a class for that. It's like, why? Like, I know through jiu-jitsu, I see kids that get healthy. They, you know, or in fact, any martial arts, it can be anything that's done with an ethical sense, like, standpoint behind it, right? They get healthy, they improve their fitness, they develop their confidence, they, you know, they learn teamwork skills, they will learn to socialize, they get all of these additional benefits from it, just like tons of other sports. But yeah, we have this negative mindset about making money from doing what we love. The more money I make, the more I can reinvest into my community, the more people I can help. You know, like, we've just had, from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, in the space of like 7 days, we had Tommy Lanka come to do a seminar, Chelsea taught a seminar, we had Dan Strauss come do a seminar, Braulio taught a seminar, and I taught a seminar last night. Because we're successful, because we can bring people into the gym like that. You know, we have been able to employ, well, we're about to take on a full-time manager who's going to be able to get out of a job that she hates, and she can start working for us. I'm supporting a guy who is a really good competitor. We're able to employ him. We're supporting another guy who's really struggling at the moment, who's doing our videography work, who's doing a killer job, but because he's like a freelance photographer, videographer, he's really struggling in the current climate, so we're able to support him. We have another girl who we're supporting as well, who's also a competitor. Because our gym is successful, we can do this. And we plan on doing it even to more and more people, because ultimately that is a feedback loop. The more we help other people, the more we put energy and effort into our gym, the more successful we are, the more people we can help, which then brings more into our gym, which means that we can then help more people. Same with the online side of things. And the way that you go about doing that is by understanding how to market, how to sell yourself, how to communicate well, but all with a really strong ethical standpoint behind it. Like, what do I stand for? What am I going to get out of it? Am I charging a fair rate for my time, my energy, the environment that I've created? So yeah, doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and I think if you look at other martial arts as well, and I've noticed this really, especially through, you know, being biased with the jiu-jitsu's perspective as well. I've trained at quite a lot of different gyms over the years, and I think one thing that sells and creates a little bit more of an ambience is when you go into an academy or a club or whatever, and it is nice.
Yeah,
It's clean. It looks new. It's well maintained. The facilities are good. They're cleaned. I mean, I'm speaking to the converted here. You've obviously trained the same as I have, in some proper spit and sawdust gyms where, like, you go onto the mats. They're about 100 years old. They were used in the 60s. They've got hair all over them. They've not been cleaned. The building that you're in is like a really old rundown garage, yet you're still paying for a service that if I went, to another club, granted I'll be paying a couple pound extra more, but the product and the environment that creates as well becomes more welcoming.
Yeah.
I mean, again, not belittling other martial arts here, but there's quite a few karate clubs and stuff around by me, but they're all in like gym halls.
Yeah,
they're really successful. They've got like 30 or 40 people in doing their karate. But if that was in a bigger place and it was their own facility, and technically they're making a living out of that too, then that would also generate more, income, revenue, and interest from people, because you've got like your Mr. Miyagi dojo that's down the road, and it's like, you've got your bonsai trees up and everything's all decked out really nice, and it becomes more appealing to people. And I think that's what jiu-jitsu is slowly becoming a little bit more with academies and stuff, and people are starting to realize that, and the actual benefit of the people that they're bringing into.
I completely agree. Like, nobody looks at, like, AOJ is a great example. No one looks at AOJ and is like, they're selling out. Like, and why is that? Like, AOJ charges, I think they're about $240 maybe $250 a month per student. Like, that's a lot, right? Like, that's a fair amount of change. It's not huge for like being in California or whatever, but that's what they're charging. The thing about AOJ, they have a great competition team, highly successful competition team. Here's a little fact that most people don't know about AOJ, is their gym it's not every month, but when they first opened, it was painted every single month. It was repainted to keep it looking like that. Like, so I went to AOJ from 2012. The last time I was there, I think, was 2016, and I haven't been over since. In that period of time, the gym virtually didn't look any different. Like, and that in terms of like the painting on the walls, like the cleanliness of the floor, the changing rooms, none of that changed, because they invested a ton of time and energy into making sure that it stayed at that level. If you look at most other gyms, how many of them can say that? Like, they might open these brand spanking new facilities. They look great from like day one. Like, a year down the line, are they still looking good? Like, do they still look as well as they did? Are they looking a little bit tired now? How are the mat? Oh, why is that paint peeling off the wall? Like stuff like that, right? And if you're successful, you can do that side of things. You can keep that standard really high because you're successful, and it feeds back into itself. Like, one of the things that our gym is, we've copied a lot of stuff from AOJ, but we have a very high volume of women that train with us. Partly that's because Chell trains there, but it's partly because the environment is so welcoming to people. Like, it is open. It looks clean. There's no there's no pictures of people like cage side bleeding or any of that kind of stuff. People are shown where to go. Like it doesn't smell. That's one of the biggest compliments that I get, and one of the most common things is like, your gym doesn't smell bad. Like, it doesn't smell like feet. And we spend like so much time and energy just to getting it smelling neutral. Like, it is unreal. But yeah, that's what we do, and that's how we invest our time, which then makes it more welcoming to people. So I'm always getting questions like, how can we get more women into the sport? Well, you need to provide clean, safe training environments for them. Like, they shouldn't be like, I mean, that should be the standard for everybody. But, when you add in things like, the closeness, it becomes slightly more challenging for women as well. For guys, you just don't care because it's a male-dominated sport. For women, you have to think about that side of things as well and make them feel more welcome into the environment. So yeah, it's crazy that you can have that dichotomy of thinking that AOJ isn't a sellout, like, yet they're making, like, they have. Last time I was there, they had like 900 students. Bearing in mind this was 4 years ago. Like, I'll let you do that. Like, they have massive overheads as well, but that's a lot of money they're making a month. Super successful. No one thinks they're a sellout. No one thinks that they shouldn't make money off their brand. Like, why is that? But then you don't hold your health self to the same standards. It's just that thing that's been built up in people's heads that you can't make money from doing what you love.
Tom, it's been amazing talking to you. I've got 5 quick fire questions that I'd like to throw at you before we finish.
I'm ready.
All right. So the first one is, what's your favorite submission?
I don't have one. The one that works.
Okay, that's a good answer. Tea or coffee?
Depends on the time of day.
This is kind of leading off from the favorite submission. Your favorite hierarchy position?
Mount, but back's the best one.
Your pre-comp music?
Don't have any.
Don't have any. And
although did just come out to the Beastie Boys, Polaris. So there you go.
Beastie Boys, it is then.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
And what's your favorite competitor of all time?
Carino.
Tom Barlow, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
And that's it. If you like the podcast, please like, share and subscribe on your podcast providers and leave me a little comment on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.